strategy analysis as the second. Because RADD, you have this requirement architecture and lot of stuff which we don't get chance to implement in our current IT projects. Similarly, the next thing is strategy analysis. So strategy analysis, the reason why most of them fail to understand the entire context is because we work in a service-based organization or in a product organization wherein we don't get the opportunity to work on the strategy side. So most of the strategy analysis is being done by the management consultants, maybe Big Four or MBB firms like McKinsey, Bain and Consulting. So for any organization, if there is anything that is that has to do with strategy, it is done by the external consulting teams. That is like, as I told you, right? Only MBB firms are, those consultants will decide upon the strategy of the organization. Whereas as a business analyst, you play a very limited role in those kind of discussions. Maybe you will provide them the documents which they need. But other than that, a business analyst role in strategy analysis is like, I'm not sure, maybe if you work in a very small organization, you may get opportunity to be part of the strategy team. But if you work in a multinational corporation or any Fortune 500 companies, a very less opportunity for a business. And so that's the reason this chapter would be quite tough for you to relate and understand unless you have a basic knowledge of what strategy consulting is. So though I'm a business analyst, I work in a Big Four firm. So I have dabbled in strategy consulting. So I will pitch in and I will provide you the inputs that may help you in understanding it better. So my intent is to decode this complete concept of strategy analysis and to ensure you that from the exam point of view all I have is 1 hour. So I'm trying to explain you the entire, I can talk about this topic for hours, but I'll try my level best to cover most of the concepts from the exam point of view in a hour. And so let's see. So let's get started. Each of the knowledge area in WebOC is very important. So you cannot say that I will study only the first 4 knowledge areas and I'll be able to answer, because the scoring system of IIBA is designed in a way wherein you will have to score 50 to 60% in each of the knowledge areas. So from the exam point for CCBA and CBAP, you have 15 questions, average of 15 to 16 questions from this particular chapter. And for CBAP folks, it will be around 80 to 20 questions. And CBAP folks, at least 6 questions will be case-based questions. That is they will give you a scenario and then you will have to find out. Other 10 or 12 questions will be direct questions wherein they will ask you what is the input-output guideline? What is the most frequently used technique? So those kind of questions you can expect. But it will not be a direct question. Even for CCBA, right from July, those folks who are giving the certification, they told, I got to know from them that they have changed the question bank. So what that means is you cannot expect any straightforward questions in CCBA here on. So every question, they will try to put it in earlier, it was I'll give you a small example. Earlier, the question was what is the input for a particular task? So that was a direct question in CCBA. But the same question is now they are rephrasing it into 3 or 4 sentences. So they will say, Tom is working as a business analyst in projects. So Tom is doing this task. What will be the input Tom needs? So the same question will get replaced into 3 or 4 sentences and you will have to choose the right. So those folks who are pretty much memorizing those concepts, or those folks who don't study in a detailed way, or who don't visualize and learn, there are high chances wherein you may fail the certification. And as you all know, the pass percentage of both CCBA and CBAP is close to 53 or 54% only. So with that note, so let's get started, guys. So first and foremost, what is the importance of strategy analysis? You would have heard this term okay, that is my strategy, that is my vision statement, that is my vision statement. Lot of things that are there in your organization, right? So every organization. So importance of strategy is something I can keep on talking, but let me decode it. So what is a strategy? Every organization that is there in the world, when they started, they will have a vision or maybe a mission statement. You would have, even in your company organization, if you go to your company website, you can see those vision and mission statements, right? So every organization which is there in the world, right, they have some purpose. So they may try to solve a problem. So just if I have to quote some example, Alibaba, Tesla, Google, Microsoft. So I'm comparing only those Fortune 500 companies. So all those Fortune 500 companies, the reason why they are in Fortune 500 is because they are solving one particular purpose, or they have a mission or vision statement, or they have a goals in mind, business objectives in mind. So only those organizations which have goals or dreams, only they succeed. Rest all they end up somewhere else, which maybe they may be a one day wonder or 2 day vendor, and then finally they close or shut their shops. So why is strategy very important in organization? So I'll give you a pro tip. So whenever you're reading strategy analysis from Babok, imagine this cannot be applied to IT projects. Imagine you're doing this for the entire organization. If this is the first tip which I'm going to give you guys, because only when you imagine that you're doing strategy analysis for the entire organization, only then you will be able to understand the terminologies that are used, that are given in Babok. So that is the first tip. And second thing, importance of strategy analysis in IT projects. To an extent, as I told you, very less probability of a IT business analyst be part of the strategy discussions, because you will not get that opportunity. That is always goes to the strategy consultants. So unless you have that knowledge about strategy consulting, very less chances of you getting involved. But anyway, for the exam perspective and from the Babok perspective, this is something IIBA expects a business analyst to know about this. So for that reason, we have to know like ABCs of strategy consulting. So we'll discuss about the inputs, outputs, and tasks, and the most commonly used techniques and important sections. And last section is about question and answers. So before we begin, I wanted to ask you guys, like, can anyone tell me, like, what is the importance of strategy, or what do you mean by a business need or a business case? So what is the actual difference between business need and business case? And if anyone, you guys can mute. Can anyone tell me, like, what is the difference between business need and business case? So that will make my work a little easier if someone can decode and tell me, like, what is the difference between business need and business case? Anyone? Okay. So I'll explain you the difference. So for any IT project, or for not even, okay, let's not put it from the perspective of IT. For any project to start, the fundamental reason for starting that project will be the business need. And how can you classify that business need? A business need can be classified as a threat or an opportunity. So let's take an example of Google. So Google is realized that like Amazon is making headwinds into the cloud space, and Amazon will become a leader in the cloud. So they thought that like Amazon will be a threat to them in the cloud space, so they introduced their own Google Cloud system. Similarly, Microsoft also thought like we cannot let Amazon take the complete leadership control in the cloud space. We also need to be. So for them, Amazon was a threat, and they introduced their own cloud system. Or the second thing is opportunity. If Microsoft senses that like maybe once we acquire TikTok, we can try to capitalize the entire user base. Like we can get to know their likes and dislikes, or like we can try to put some marketing through those users. So you guys would have read that news about Microsoft. Why should Microsoft acquire TikTok? So Microsoft, Walmart, and everybody is like planning to acquire TikTok, is because they know that user base and they want to cash on that user base, do some marketing, try to understand user behavior, because that is the most used app in the entire world, right? Even when it compared to Facebook, the total number of hits and likes is like when you see per day basis active users, the total number of users in Facebook is like if there are 100 users, only 8% users are like active users. But if you look at TikTok, 32% of the users are like active users. So that's the reason why most of the organizations want a big chunk of that user information is what they need for their marketing purposes. So the point which you have to notice is, for any business need, it can be classified as a threat or an opportunity. So imagine if you're working in your, now just imagine from your organization standpoint. the project which you're working in your current organization, is it because of a threat, or is it an opportunity? So most of the cases, most of the IT projects is like an opportunity, but 10% of the IT projects can be classified as a threat, because we understood that competitor is building it, so we are also doing it. So 90% would be an opportunity in order to make the work of the stakeholders work easier, or for reporting, or for like bringing up the analytical capabilities and everything. So the first stage of any project is strategy analysis. So there is something that is like troubling the business stakeholders. So they are like wondering what they should do. So whenever they are like thinking about it, the business need is arrived. The next thing is, once the business need is arrived, a business analyst will get onboarded to that project. So that's when the senior stakeholders or sponsor will tell you, like, this is a problem statement. We want a IT system, or we want a CRM system, or we want this to be done, or something. They will give you a high level information. Business analyst will capture that information, and business analyst will do all the research, and what are the other options in the market. So you do the complete research and analysis of like what can be done, along with the help of the technical architect, project manager, business architect. And then finally you come up with the options. Maybe you will think that like we need not create an application. There are some COTS software in the market which are doing the same function. For instance, let's take a classic case of payroll system. So management wants to change the complete payroll practice. So instead of building it on your own, you think that like let's buy it from Workday and customize it, or maybe we can go for a Ramcos, or we can go for SAP. So you come up with all those options, and you prepare a justification document wherein you say, wherein you will tell to business like which is the best option out of it. And that document is called as a business case. So ideally, a project will start with a business need, and further that is justification document is called as a business case. And once the business case is identified, our normal business analysis process starts, right? So you come up with the BRD, you come up with the functional design documentation, and then finally the requirements are like baselined, and then finally the development starts, and then you start with the testing, and finally you release the whatever finally the release happens, right? The production release. So that's how the entire strategy analysis is all about. So as you can see, the strategy analysis, where does it fit in the overall business analysis value spectrum? It starts at the beginning. So sometimes it may start at the middle of the it is an ongoing process also, but for new projects it starts at the beginning. But ideally, if for your ongoing project also, if the business feels that like there is a threat or opportunity, it can be an ongoing process also. So for the new project, you can kickstart it during the midway of the project also. High chances wherein if it's all depends upon the business need and opportunity, and if they feel that is something more priority, so they will focus on creating a new project. So we already discussed about the business need, and almost as you all know that every business right now in this world are like undergoing risk and uncertainties. Let me give you an example. So in the month of Jan, my project, the IT project which I was working on, had a target of around, we had a budget of around 4.3 million. And with the advent of COVID, ideally we thought like we'll go with these many features, we'll give these many features to the stakeholders, and we had come up with a 1-year plan, and we started with our release 1. But in the month of April, because of the COVID, there were some pressures from the senior stakeholders regarding the total allocated budget, and then 4.3 million budget got reduced to around 2.1 million. So in that case, whatever the features which were like a prioritized list, we had to remove it, and we went with some, if there are 10 priority items, we finally came up with like top 4 priority, and that is we'll be implementing those 4 priority items for the entire year. So every business, every organization in this world have like a lot of risk and uncertainty. So no organization can predict and say that like we don't have any risk, or we have anticipated all of the risk, because I'm just citing an example of COVID. So long before it was Brexit, and long before GDPR, and before that Obamacare, and all those business analysts who were like part of it, and those business analysts with 20 years of experience, they know that impact of Y2K also. So, and 2009 Lehman Brothers crash and everything. So any external event that is happening in the world can have an impact on the overall organization way of working. So in strategy analysis, we try to find out all the risk that can happen, and what are the uncertainties, what are the opportunities, everything we will try to note it down from the organizational standpoint. And then once we understand like this is a problem with our organization, you try to come up with like I told you, right, you will try to come up with an options to address it. So option one can be like buying a software, option B can be going with SAP, option three can buy a Workday. Like that, you will come up with an option that can address the business need or opportunity. And finally, you are like coming up with the future state. So you are like out of the thin air, you're documenting that like once this options are implemented, this is how a solution will look. So strategy analysis, you can see some references. Maybe if you have to relate it to your current IT project, you can say that like what you do as part of your gap analysis, right? Comparison versus as-is and to-be. That can be attributed to what strategy analysis is, but that is on a practical real world what we do. But from WebOps standpoint, that is like only 10% or 15%. So, but that is what we do completely in our IT project. So that's the reason I'm stressing the same point. Whenever you're doing strategy analysis, focus it from the organizational standpoint. So let's get started, folks. So there are 4 tasks that are given in WebOps. The first task is analyze current state, and then you have define future state, assess risk, and then the last task is define change strategy. So you can see the 2 tasks that are mentioned here is something which you do currently, that is analyzing the current state. You try to find out like what is the current process in our organization, what is the current application in our organization, what is the cash balance, what is the culture, what is the policy, everything right from A to Z, right from the financial position to everything you have to capture. And then you are defining the future state, wherein you say like this is what I want my organizations to be in the future. So right now, if you have only 30 applications, down the line we will have 50 applications. So that's how you come up with like based on your research or based on your understanding of the overall ecosystem, you are proposing a future state. And the third stage, you try to find out like what can go wrong. Everything you're identifying is if there is any risk or something that can derail your organization from meeting its future goal. So that is what you find out as part of assess risk. And the last task is to come up with the change strategy. So I can talk about change strategy for a very long time, but those folks, I mean, ideally we all know that like business analysis, we know project management, but something which you guys can learn about is change management. And you know what? There are only few BAs who are trained in change management, and there is a very good scope for a change management business analyst. I mean, it's not, I will not call change management business analyst. They are called as change agent or catalyst. So that is altogether a different concept. So whenever an organization is taking a big leap of faith, so imagine all these days they were using traditional softwares and now they are moving into the cloud or they are moving into a new SAP system altogether. So that would require a lot of preparation, lot of planning, lot of training. So this change management guy will be the someone who will be entrusted with that responsibility, and he will ensure that like the transition is like quite there is no problem with the transition. Things are getting done easily. So that is what change management is all about. And whenever you're doing a big leap of transition from a current state to that future state, and that has a lot of things that you need to focus upon, that those things are called as change strategy. So we'll be discussing that each of the tasks in detail. So now let's get started. So the common inputs for the entire knowledge area is first needs. What is the importance of needs? Because that is the external trigger that is going to make that organization to start a new project, right? So business need is something that is a primary input. The next thing is influences, which can be internal or external. So what do you mean by influences? So I told you, anything that is coming out from the organization. So if that the reason why that opportunity is found out by some particular team, so that in cases the influences will be internal. But it is something because of a competitor, then in that case influences will be external. And then you have the stakeholder engagement approach. So what is stakeholder engagement approach? You guys can see that this is an input that is used in the BAPM chapter. So in layman terms, what is stakeholder engagement approach is, you write down all the list of stakeholders and whom should you contact and what is the mode of communication, whether it is formal communication or informal communication. Complete detailed document that gives you details about the stakeholders, the entire stakeholders of your organization is called as the stakeholder engagement approach. And then you have the elicitation results. So this is also the output that comes from the elicitation chapter. So elicitation results. So folks, let me give you an example. I mean, ideally, I do interview a lot of business analysts and I ask them like, what is the result of the elicitation? So they tell me that like the result of elicitation is requirements. I normally reject those candidates because they don't have a basic understanding of like what is the difference between elicitation results and requirement. So elicitation results are not requirements. Elicitation results can be further refined into requirements. So what is elicitation results? Imagine you're going and talking to a stakeholder, you're doing an interview, and that they may tell what they want. So they may say that like I want a report, or I want, my representatives are not able to see the complete access to information, or like reporting module is not there. So I want a report to see like who's doing the maximum. So they tell their needs and desires. The needs and desires are not called as requirements. They are called as elicitation results. And once you go back to your desk after the elicitation activity, you further refine, you further think about it, and then you convert those elicitation results into requirements. And that happens in the RLM chapter and RADD chapter. And then you have two types of elicitation results. So one is unconfirmed, another one is confirmed. So unconfirmed is something wherein after the meeting, whatever you note down from them, that is called as unconfirmed. But later, you send them the minutes of the meeting, and once they approve, like this is what was discussed, then it is called as confirmed. And then you have this requirements prioritized. So you guys will be like wondering what is the use of this requirements prioritized coming in strategy analysis, because this requirements prioritized is considered as an input for a change strategy. So that's the reason we have added it. But key input, let's go with the flow. So the example which I have cited, few things which you can easily, there are folks who still memorize this input and output, but my intent is like not make you memorize it. So let's take a concept. You're like starting the project. So very moment you are onboarded to the project, I told you the sponsor is going to give you the needs document. So that is something a primary input for you. And then what are the external triggers? That is influences. So easy to remember. And then whom you should talk. So that is a key document. So stakeholder engagement will give you the results. And whatever was earlier discussed, elicitation results, right? Confirmed and unconfirmed. So requirements prioritized is like the odd one out here. Let's keep it here. Once we discuss all the 4 tasks, we'll come back and visit. So what are the 4 tasks? Analyze current state, define future state, assess risk, and define change strategy. We'll be discussing each of the 4 tasks in detail in the next 30 minutes, one by one. So let's discuss with analyze current state. So what do you mean by analyze current state? So you're trying to find out like what is the current position of the organization. It is not the current position of the IT project. It is from the overall organization, what is happening in the organization. So you try to do a documentation. So you find out like, okay, why do they need a change? So why is that like they're thinking about moving into the cloud? So let's take an example. Maybe I believe most of you from India. So in that case, let's take an example of State Bank of India. And you know that like core banking application used by State Bank of India is like by TCS banks. And now they feel that like they attended a roadshow by Infosys and they looked into the Infosys core banking product, which is Finacle. And the CEO, CFO was like quite impressed, and they want to move from TCS core banking product to Infosys core banking product, which is Finacle. So that is what the business need is. That is like move from old core banking system and upgrade it to the new core banking system. Now, and what you do as part of analyzing the current state, you are onboarded as a business analyst to the project. Your first job is to understand the reason why they want to move from TCS to Infosys. Is it like any specific reason? Is there like any opportunity which is not addressed by TCS but addressed by Infosys? So your job is to find out what is good in Infosys, and what's okay. I mean, we did not cite the name of the companies. What is good in Finacle and what is not there in iBanks. So that is your first job. And second thing, what you're going to do is like, imagine tomorrow I'm replacing it to that of Finacle. What can go wrong, or like what can go good? That documentation is also what you're doing it. So analyzing current state is completely a documentation exercise wherein you try to find out like what is the current strengths and weaknesses of your current application. That is, and this is not only application but also your organization. And the second thing is, what can be like tomorrow if I'm changing something, that is if I'm moving from solution A to solution B, what can go wrong, or like what all things in solution A has to be changed. That is also something which you will have to document. So I'm not discussing more about the inputs and outputs because of the paucity of the time. So the key elements that are documented in change strategy. So if somebody is asking you, so maybe I can give you an example. So you will have to document the business needs. And WebOx says that like there are 4 methods of documenting the business need. So WebOx says that like the first thing is like top down. So if that requirement is coming up from the senior management, that is like all the CEO, CFO, or C-level executives are giving you that particular requirement, then that business need method is called as top-down approach. If the requirement is coming up because of any problem, so because the iBank's product is taking a long time to generate a report, so that is a problem and they want to replace it with that of Finacle product. So if it is you're doing any change because of a problem, that approach is called as bottom up. And the third thing, if SBI manager feels that if they have some additional capabilities, that is like the general ledger is taking a long time to load in iBanks, but in Finacle it was when they showed the demo, it was taking only 3 seconds. So whenever if you sense an opportunity in order to increase the efficiency, that method is called as from middle management. And the last thing is that is triggered by some external drivers, maybe a customer demand or a business competition. That method is called as external drivers. So these 4 things are very important from the exam point of view. Make a note. They may ask you like, how can you, what are the different types of business need in the enterprise? So it is top down, bottom up, middle management, and external drivers, and it is available in the business needs section. So first you note down like who's driving it. Is it from the executives or is it because of a problem? Next thing, you try to note down the organizational structure and culture. So why that is important is WebOx is saying if your organization is completely rigid, so especially those folks who are working in service-based organization, it's like, okay, I'm not being an advocate here, but most of the service-based organizations, they don't promote innovation or creativity. Whereas if you work in a startup or when you work in a product-based organization, you can see that like, your ideas are being valued, your ideas are being considered. The problem with the organizational structure in most of the companies is because there is some hierarchy which they follow. That is like if you propose something, it has to go through your supervisor, with your manager, senior manager, partner. And by the time most of them, somebody in the crowd is not interested with your ideas, it may not see light of the day. But if your organization is something where they promote open communication, there are high chances wherein you can directly interact with the CEO and you can propose your ideas. So WebOx says that like culture of the organization, whether they promote innovation, creativity, everything has to be like understood, because you are now going to change the solution from like earlier. Because I told you the example that like SBI is using that system for 10 years. And all of a sudden, if you're saying to those cashiers and clerks that like, I'm going to change your system, buddy, first thing is like, they will say no. They may also do a strike also saying that like, no, I cannot learn this new application. They may say, because ideally the human trait is like, we are resistant to change, right? So whenever say somebody, we are used to that we are like, we have our own comfort zone with that application for 10 years. And all of a sudden you're coming and saying that we are saying, ideally they have that apprehension because they may think that like, okay, I thought I'm a SME in using it. Now, if you're coming up with a new solution, even a new joiner can learn all about it. So I cannot project myself as an SME. So all those insecurities, apprehension. So whenever you tell them, ideally they will be resistant to the change and they will say no, they will not accept it at all. But ideally, if it flows down that like this is from the executive management, then these folks, they have no other go, they will have to accept it. The next thing which you have to document is all the capabilities and process. Like currently in TCS product, what is the current capabilities of TCS, like reporting module, or maybe the other modules like payment module, mortgage module, account origination module, like what is the workflow. Everything A to Z of the current system is documented along with the processes. And next thing which you have to document as part of your analyzing current status, technology and infrastructure. So how many application servers, how many servers we have, like is there any data warehousing capacity. So everything, like how many servers, like complete information of your technical infrastructure setup also has to be documented. And then the important section is the policies. What are the current business policies? For instance, the compensation policy, or it can be something that like training policy, or everything. Current policies A to Z is also documented. And then the business architecture. Business architecture is very important because that will give you an understanding about like if you're changing one particular module, where that will impact in the overall landscape, right? For instance, account origination module, those folks who have worked in core banking, you guys would have understood the importance of loan origination or the account origination. In account origination, KYC plays a very important role. So if in KYC tomorrow you're proposing a new method, that may impact the workflow in some other module also, maybe the loan module or maybe in the mortgage module, anywhere that would get impacted. So business architecture documentation is also important. So you will not get opportunity to document. So business architect will provide you the input. The next thing is internal assets. So what do you mean by internal assets? Internal assets is the complete financial information about your company. So that like what are the total cash available, whether we have sufficient resources to start the project, and 5 years cash flow. You look into the income statement and balance sheet, and the brand names, everything you need to look at. And the last thing, you have to look at the external influences. So what are external influences is like tomorrow, if there is any dependencies, constraints, or somebody who is going to impact your business, the way how you work, who are all those folks? So it can be the customers, or it can be the competitors, or it can be the political and regulatory environment. A few examples is Brexit and GDPR. So because of the changes in Brexit and GDPR, most of the IT projects, they had to revisit their strategy and they had to change their requirements. And it can be also some macroeconomic factors also. So like if you're working in a banking project, you guys know the importance of like the unemployment rate, inflation rate, central bank repo rate, and CRR rate. Any change in that would get impacted in your project, right? So these all things also has to be documented. Okay. So these things, you may be still wondering, as a business analyst, I have never got the opportunity to work on this thing. And to be candid, I'll tell you, even a 15 or a 20-year-old business analyst will never get opportunity to work on this, because this are all the work done by the management consulting folks. You guys, as a business analyst, maybe you will still, a business analyst will not be part of this discussion, because this will be done only by the C-level executives plus strategy consulting firms. You maybe 10% of the business analysts would get that opportunity to like give them the sufficient information. And in case if you're working in a very small organization, and if you get opportunity to do all of this, to be, I would say that like you're too lucky and to be part of all this. But from the exam perspective, guys, I've clearly explained you, right? The complete. So what you're doing as part of analyzing current state is like the current state of the organization is documented not only from the IT standpoint, but also from this culture standpoint, capabilities and processes, technology, policies, business architecture, internal assets, everything is documented. So you have now documented it. Okay, now let's go in a story-based mode, because that will help you to understand. And anyway, once this session is done, I would recommend you to go and read BAPOC. And once you read BAPOC, you will be able to connect all the dots. So my job here is to tell you the story. And so you can go back, and once you read BAPOC, I believe you will be able to connect all the dots. So now at this stage, what you have done is you have completed the documentation. And what are the outputs for change strategy? One second. So the output of analyzing current state is the current state description, which is the document. And you also have the output called business requirements. So how do you arrive at those business requirements? Is because as part of analyzing current state, you're going and talking to the lot of stakeholders. So when you go and talk to the lot of stakeholders, they may tell like what are their desires, their wants and everything. So those all things can be captured as business requirements. So those requirements that comes from the stakeholder. And how does that requirements originate? You're going and asking them, okay, you're going and talking to a SBI clerk, and you're going and asking him like, okay, how are you currently generating the report? So he may tell you like, this is how I generate the report. So he may also tell like, it would have been great if instead of clicking this, I want this report to have these many parameters. Okay, so during your part of current state description documentation, whenever the stakeholder is giving you what they want, those all things are captured as business requirement. So you're doing two jobs here. First job is to find out how currently the process is being done. And whenever during the discussion, if the stakeholder is saying like this could have been better, and if they're saying like this could have been done through that way, and if they're saying like those all discussions which are related to like improvements, you're capturing it as the business requirement. Hope you guys are getting it. So can anyone confirm me like so far you're good? You guys are able to understand?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the confirmation. So now the story, we started the story wherein you are doing the documentation of your current organization, like policies and everything. And you also have the business requirements in hand. With that, now you're coming back to your desk. And what you're going to do is like activity which you now like finding out, you're now using your creativity to find out like, I know what is the business problem. Now, what can answer that? What is the solution which I could recommend to the stakeholders? Because now imagine yourself as a management consulting and you understood what is the problem they are facing. So the problem which you understood, so let's go to our example. The problem which you saw is that TCS system was very slow, and it is like it is still using the mainframe, and it is not that robust. The reporting capabilities, for instance, if I'm the area manager, if I have to see the complete transactions of the ledger, like what is the total cash balance in close to 50 branches in my city, I'll have to wait for that information for 2 days, because 24 hours it will take to update in the central server. And those all things, when I attended that roadshow of Infosys, I found that like within 12 hours, I'm able to see all those reports. So I'm just giving you some example. So I understood like this is a key business problem, because they are feeling that the application is quite slow or application is not that robust. So now I'm going back to my desk and finding out, okay, these are all the areas which I've identified, and I'll look into all those business requirements, and I will try to connect with all those. I'll try to connect all the dots, because this business requirements is coming from different stakeholders. I would have talked to a clerk, I would have talked to an area manager, I would have talked to the infrastructure team, I would have talked to the technology team, I would have talked to the CFO, I would have talked to the CTO, CEO. So everybody would have given me some set of requirements. You cannot say that like everybody will give you the same flow, nothing. So I will get CTO, he will talk about like the technology related requirements, that like it should be in cloud and everything. A CFO would have talked about the repo rate modification, or internal rate, IRR, central bank things which needs to be customized. So those all things should be temporary, and how to do about it. So everybody will give their own set of requirements. And now since you have it, now you look into all of it, and then you try to find out like consensus among the stakeholders of what do they really want. And the most important one you will prioritize, and then finally you will say that like this is what they want, this is what the future state application should look like. So in this case, the example which I cited, we already know Infosys what they want. Now imagine a case wherein they don't know anything about Infosys, but they need a system that is currently matching with those requirements that are provided by Infosys, but they don't know about it. But you are now capturing what they really want, and that documentation is called as future state documentation, which is also called as future state description. So what is the primary input for this? 80% of those folks who are preparing for CCBA and CBAP, this is the second pro tip for you. 80% of the BAPOC knowledge areas, the previous output will be considered as an input for the next task. So you need not memorize all of it. Just remember what is the first input and output, because the second, third, and fourth you will be easily able to derive it once you clearly remember that the first slide I showed you all the common inputs, right? If you guys can remember that, rest all is easy. because it's quite easy. So in the previous task, we already know we got two outputs, which is current state description and business requirement. So we will look into the business requirements document alone here. So you may ask me, like, what will we do with current state description? Yes, current state description also will be looked at, but as per BEPOC, it is used as a reference material. That's why you can see a current state description is mentioned as a guidelines and tools. So primarily you take only the business requirements, you try to decode what do they really want. You connect all the dots, right from the CEO till the clerk, every dots are connected. And that task, what you do is define future state, and that results in three outputs. The first output which you see is business objectives, and then future state description, and then potential value. So future state description is again a documentation activity. So you note down, like, this is what they want in future. So right now it is taking 24 hours. They want this report to be in 12 hours. And the application is not robust, application is slowness, everything, every requirement you say, this is the current problems, these all things needs to be addressed. The important thing is about business objectives. So business objectives is like you are based on the discussion with the stakeholders, and when you look into the business requirements, you get an understanding about, like, what do they really want, and those things are called as business objectives. Or the better word I would say is, like, this is what they really want out of that new system. That is, like, they want an increase in number of sales, they want number of order increase, number of the payment should get completed in 5 seconds. So these are all can be classified as the business objectives plus potential value. So potential value is like it is a combination of both business objectives only. So potential value example, which I say, like, in the future state, once this is implemented, I want my sales to increase. I want the payment to be completed within 5 seconds. I want the revenue to increase. So whenever you are adding some business objectives, that also is called as potential value. That is, like, once this solution is implemented, what is the benefit that I'm going to get of that solution is called as potential value. So define future state, you have three outputs. Business objectives and potential value will give you an idea about what does, like, once I'm implementing this, what is the benefit that I'm going to get. And you guys have to be careful, because this is what that is going to help you to convince the stakeholders to invest the amount. So what you write down in the potential value, you're saying that, like, number of customers will increase. That is, like, if there are 100 customers right now, we can make it 200, 300. And because they will look into the potential value, whether it is negative or whether it is positive. So number of benefits that the business is going to get because of this new application is what they will look at. So number of benefits is more, then business will say, okay, I'm ready to invest. But if the number of benefits is less, that is, cost is more, but benefits are less. So in that case, it is not viable to go with that project. So that's the reason, as a business analyst, whenever you're doing the future state description, pay special attention to business objectives and potential value. Try to find out if the potential value is negative or positive. So you can read more about this in BEPOC, the importance of potential value, and that is like a short question for CCBA folks. They will ask you the importance of, like, the potential value, negative and positive. So you guys can read it from the element chapter. So make a note, guys. Potential value is very important from the exam point of view. So what do you do as part of future state description? So whenever you're doing the future state description, similar to that of CSD, this is something which you say, like, okay, what will be the business goals and objectives in the future, and you follow that SMART framework, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bounded. So you will write down, as a customer, the number of customers should be, like, will get increased by, the number of high value customers will get increased by 30% in 6 months. So something that can be tested in last 6 months, some performance measures, everything you will add. And what will be the scope of the solution, like what all things can be catered, those also will be documented. And you also document the constraints, what can go wrong, or is there anything that we cannot change? Because if you work in a banking project, you cannot change the complete thing, because some 30 to 40% of the banking projects are governed by the Reserve Bank of India or the central bank rules and regulation. So those all things, no matter how much of innovation you do, creativity you do, those all things are governed by the government. You cannot just simply change the deposit rates or repo rate. Those are all controlled by the organization. So those all things has to be documented. And organizational structure and culture. If you feel something has to change in the organization, that you have to say, like, in the future state, organization should be like this. If your organization is completely doesn't support creativity, you can say in future state we should support creativity. And what are the future capabilities and process? So everything here is documented from the future perspective. Maybe right now you have only 4 application servers. In the future, we should have 6 application servers in order to cater to the complete load or number of users. So a classic example which I can give you is IRCTC. So IRCTC, when they started, they would have started with some 3 or 4 application servers because they didn't anticipate that most of the folks will log in through their mobile or log into the website and do the transaction. But right now, every 6 months or 1 year, they are revisiting their IT infrastructure setup because because of Geo and low-cost broadband connections, nobody is now going to the reservation center in order to do the booking. So now everybody is relying on the IRCTC website. They now will have to cater to a lot of traffic. So this is something which maybe during the start of the project, they wouldn't have envisaged this many hits in a second or in a hour and everything. But right now they are like scoping it up. They're increasing the infrastructure setup. And then in future, in order to accommodate your future solution, is there any business policy I have to change? So let me give you an example. So this is something which you guys can easily relate also. So we built, so this was for a telecommunication client in Australia. Okay, so that I was working as a business analyst for that client, and we wanted to increase the, so these folks, they are like, we call them as a direct sales representative. So these guys, they go and pitch about the broadband services, and whenever they make a connection, we give them some commission and those kind of things. So, and they are like part of the company payroll also. So every day they are able to do some 40 to 50 transactions. And the reason is like they have to capture a lot of client information. So they have to talk to the client, get those information, and they do it in a tablet. So our IT project was that we thought let's enhance this. Currently from 40 to 50, why can't they do 80 to 90? Because if they talk to a single customer, in order to enter, it was taking 10 minutes of time. So we thought let's drastically reduce it, like the workflow, everything. Let's do some process engineering and let's reduce it. So we wanted to bring that 10 minutes to 5 minutes, so that the customer, they can go and talk to the other customers and they can capture most of the information. So that was the intent of the project. And we looked into the workflow, we did everything. And we finally rolled out the new application to the representatives. And we started observing for 3 months, 6 months. But still, to our surprise, there were no increase in the customers. It was still the same, 40 to 50. Nobody was doing anything extra. Everybody was still sticking to 40 to 50 only. And we were thinking okay, there may be some problem with our application. But later we came to know that there was not a single complaint against the application. The transaction was getting completed within 5 minutes itself. But it was because of a policy. Because they had this compensation policy wherein the representatives maximum they will get paid only for 50 transactions. Average is they will get paid only for 50 transactions per day. So they were thinking what if it is increasing to 80, 90 also, I'm going to get paid only for 50 transactions. So why should I do that extra work? So this was not discovered in any of the meetings, and we didn't know that this can impact their performance. I mean, this can impact their efficiency also. So later we had to talk to the HR team. I mean, it's not the IT business analyst. I didn't do it. So later the stakeholders understood there was some limitation from the business policy, and then they went to the HR team. And finally, when we removed that limitation, then we saw that productivity increase. So folks, this is a small thing which was missed, but later we understood the small business HR policy limited. So I'm just citing you some real life examples. So that's where this policy documentation is very important. You have to read out all the policies and check when the future state, is there any policy that can impact it? Because in the case of SBI, going from TCS to Infosys, you guys can sense that there should be a complete support from the HR team and L&D team of SBI, because they will have to first provide training, lot of trainings, lot of resource materials, because completely from the scratch, all the clerks, bank managers, they will have to understand the reporting mechanism, everything, right? So we need the complete support, the training policy, and everything needs to be checked. Maybe they can reimburse only one program or second program, or reattempt. Everything has to be checked. And you have to look into the business architecture and what you're documenting, what will be the future business architecture look like. You also look into the internal assets, whether the company has the sufficient fund. So down the line, another 5 years, if this project is running, do we have the sufficient funds? And the next thing is very, very important from the exam point of view. you document the assumptions. So guys, what you're thinking from your desk is based on some premise or based on some assumption. So out of the thin air, you assume that like this is what the future state will look like, because the application is not developed still. So out of the thin air, you guys are like sitting and thinking, okay, this is how the future will look like, right? So those all things, if you say that like the number of customers will increase, you're saying it because on some assumption. So maybe you're reducing the channel, the funnel rate or lead conversion in the CRM. So those are all core CRM terms. So you may reduce or do some business process engineering and all. So whatever things you're assuming that may result in this, that needs to be documented in the assumptions column. And then you also document the potential value. And this is what I said, a very important section from the exam point of view, whether it is a positive or negative. So these are things that are documented as part of defined future state. And the next task, it talks about finding out the risk. So what can be the risk is because, anything can come out, like from one solution A to solution B, in between that stage is called as transition stage. And there may be a lot of risk. For instance, the first risk is that like the stakeholders are not ready to accept the change. Stakeholders will cite that like we cannot learn the new application, or maybe SBA L&D team, learning and development team, will not have sufficient resources. So now at this juncture, once the future state is identified, let's continue our story. So now you sit down and you think about what can be the risk that can impact us from going from solution A to solution B. Those all risks, you have to think from multiple parameters: organizational related risk, IT related risk, policy related risk. Every risk has to be documented, and you will have to create a risk register. First risk is like, what if the cashiers say that like I'm not ready to learn the application? So you write down, if they say no, what is the next potential resolution for that risk? So each of the risk categories are identified, and you're clearly documenting it, like what is the consequence of that risk, and what will be the impact, what is the likelihood of that risk, and what is the potential time frame when the risk might occur. So this is something which will help you to prepare yourself before the transition. You're like thinking like these all things, risk can come when I'm like going into the new future application. So all the risk needs to be documented. And from exam point of view, you guys need to know that like the risk tolerance, which you see in the slide here, is very important from the exam point of view. Every organization can be classified into 3 types: risk averse, risk taking, neutral. So as a business analyst, IIBA wants you to, BEBOC wants you to find out what is the risk of your organization, like a risk taking thing of your organization. So if your organization is some culture is like they don't want to take any risk, then you call it as risk averse organization. But if your organization is okay, that is like, I'm ready to take any risk, no problem, let's go with our solution. If any risk comes also, we are least bothered. So in that case, it will come under risk taking. But if your organization is like okay with a small amount of risk that is not going to have any potential impact on their operations or business, then those organizations will come under the neutral category. From exam point of view, this risk tolerance can be very important section for both CCBA and CBAP. So what do you find out is like you try to find out the unknown. So anything can happen at any point of time, because COVID was something which none of the organizations would have anticipated, especially the airline organizations or travel organizations. Nobody would have expected that this could have happened, or this could come as a potential risk, wherein the entire world would be in lockdown for like close to 3 or 4 months. So anything can come out. But if your strategy team, your organization is, if they are that creative, or if they are like very much focused, they know how to write down all the risk, and they may project, I mean, they know like what all can impact your business, and those all things will be documented. And for each of the risk, you're also providing a recommendation. That is like, this is a risk. What could be if this risk occurs, what can we do at that situation? So you're documenting this as part of your assessed risk. So what is the output here is, as you can see, the output is the risk analysis results. So whatever the risk, you're writing down the recommendation. So this is also a documentation task. And let's go to the final part. You're coming up with a change strategy, and this change strategy is all about change management. So you guys can go and research. The BEBOK doesn't give you more information about change management, but change management is altogether a different concept, similar to that of project management. So you guys can know more about change management through Google. BEBOK is giving you only 25% of the information. So what do you do is, like, anyway you decided that, like, from solution A I'm going to solution B. So now you are there in the midpoint. So in the midpoint you already identified the risk also. So now you have to find out, like, what you come up with, like, some action plan, like how can I mitigate those risks, or what should I do here. So now I have decided that I'm moving from TCS product to Infosys product. So my first stage is to write down all those requirements that are implemented in the TCS, like what are the reports, what are the parameters. Next thing is, like, all those report parameters has to be mapped into the Infosys system. Second thing is coming up with a training plan. Third thing is coming up with the IT infrastructure plan. Fourth thing is, like, coming up with the transition requirements. So those folks who are wondering what is transition requirements is mentioned in the chapter BAPM. So transition requirements, whenever a system is moving from one system to another, temporary requirements are called as transition requirements. So transition requirements needs to be jotted down. So these all things you do as part of your change strategy section. So as you can see in the slide, you describe the nature of the change because of the context. You identify alternative change strategies, justification, what is the resources that is needed. So here it is like action plan. So in all those first three is like a documentation, more about like what you have to do. But here you come up with an action plan. You analyze all those things that can go wrong. You analyze, complete all the solutions, everything you analyze in a deeper level. And here you provide a complete information. And this document is called as change strategy documentation. So the key elements that are involved in this change strategy documentation is the solution scope, wherein you will have what are the things that are in scope and out scope. And you also do the gap analysis. You do an enterprise readiness assessment. This is very important from the exam point of view. You guys, they will ask you, like, what do you mean by enterprise readiness assessment? So enterprise readiness assessment, as a business analyst, you need to find out whether your organization is ready to move into the future state. Is all the resources ready? Is the sufficient budget is there? Everything from multiple parameters when you analyze, and when you say that, like, when you give a go ahead, that is called as enterprise readiness assessment. So as a business analyst, BEBOK says that, like, you have to come up with that enterprise readiness assessment. And only when you feel that, like, the organization is ready to take the plunge, only then you have to go ahead with that. And then you also come up with the release planning and transition state. See, this migration from normal, imagine if you're moving from one state to completely, those folks who have experience working in migration projects can relate it, right? Migration projects are like one of the toughest projects. So if I have to give you an example, Samsung had the Samsung user data was there stored in Oracle, and they wanted to move it to Amazon. So sorry, AWS, Amazon Web Services, into cloud. So the problem with Oracle was that, like, it was time consuming and it was not that robust. So that was the reason. And this migration project lasted for 2 years. You can Google out and you can find out the complete information. So for over the 2 years, 1 million user data had to be, I'm not sure about is it 1 million or 10 million or 1 billion also. I read it some 3 or 4 months before, but that was a very good use case. So in that use case, I found out that this project was planned for 2 years, and they kept multiple checkpoints in order to check whether they're going in the right direction. So every 3 months, they had one release. So maybe in the first release, they moved some of the user data into the cloud, and other was still in the ideally other components were like still in Oracle, and Amazon Web Services also supporting for few of the components. So they didn't take the complete plunge because everything is user data, right? And they didn't want to take risk also. If tomorrow, because of the transition, if something is not working, then users should not. The usability part was also concentrated and everything. So it was like a 2-year staggered project, wherein they kept multiple transition phases. Like, for instance, 50 million customer records were like first transitioned, and then another 10 million, 20 million geography wise data was transitioned, Play Store information was transitioned. So in multiple stages, the business analyst and the change management team involved, and they did this transition, and within 2 years they did the seamless transition of the complete user data. So these things will be documented as part of the change strategy. How are you going to achieve this? Like, what will be the release planning? So even now, you guys, have to understand that like the development has not started. Out of the thin air, you're doing this documentation. So this documentation will be called as the change strategy documentation. So with this, we have, I guess we have come to the end of the session. And with this, I'm just summing up the strategy analysis. So you guys, I know within a hour, it's not possible to complete the entire, but my intention was to just give you an overview. So the key takeaway from this session for you is to understand like what is strategy analysis. You're moving from the current state to the future state. In between, you're finding out what are the risks and how will we get there in the most effective way, and what is the ongoing activity, and you will have to align it with the other strategies. So these are all the key elements. And if you guys are asking me what are the key techniques that we use, and if I'm listing out those techniques, you guys wouldn't have got opportunity to work on it. But the most frequently used technique is balance scorecard, brainstorming, business model canvas, business rule analysis. So if I'm giving you an example, so let me share my screen. Just give me a second. So I wanted to show you guys, but let me see here. So this is the example, business model canvas. So this is a strategic example. So you need to know the business model canvas of Uber. So I'm just seeing here the business model canvas of Uber, like how do Uber makes money. So on overall, because this will help me in preparing the current state description. So who are all the key partners? Who are all the key activities? What is the cost structure? What is the revenue structure? What is the customer relationship? What is the customer segment? So business model canvas. So these all things are mentioned in the technique section. You guys can check out. So that's all about it, guys. So let me go back to the deck. So the exam point of view, those folks who go through the traditional way of preparing for the examination, this is something that can help you, like total task, what are the inputs, what are the elements, and what are the outputs. And for those folks, CBAP folks, scenario-based questions will come from change strategy and from assess risk. So these two sections, you can expect scenario-based questions. And what kind of scenario-based questions can come as in assess risk? They will tell you, they will give you a big problem statement. They will introduce you to some company like Acme and what is the problem with that company. And then they will try to ask you like what can be the risk and how those risks can be mitigated. So as a business analyst, they will ask you the question in that way. As a business analyst, what do you think will be the right suggestion in order to solve it? So those kind of questions you can expect. And for CCBA folks, most of the questions will be related to the input, output, and techniques only. So you guys need to focus only on these things, right? If you guys can focus on this, and you guys have to read those elements also, because in between those paragraphs, some important points are written on those paragraphs. So like I told you, the importance of reading the risk covers, risk neutral, and all, right? So those all things, hidden things are like there in the elements. So maybe 2 or 3 readings of the elements is enough. But you guys have to be like 100%. At any point of time, if somebody is quizzing you about like what is the input for assess risk, you should be in a position to answer them, because all you have is like only 2 minutes to answer that question. So try to memorize most of the, I mean, I would not say memorize, try to connect the dots, because if you start your PEPA preparation with that of story, right, most of the things will remain in your mind and you need not mug up also. So that's all about it, guys. I believe at least within a hour, I tried my best to convey that message, or like at least to an extent. I would not say I'm the best and everything. To an extent, I believe I was able to give you a small heads up about like what strategy analysis is all about. So any open questions or any feedback suggestions?
Yes, Satish, this is good. Thanks for this. Can you tell me in brief, like what comes under this guidelines and tools? In your slides and in the BA book, also guidelines and tools are also mentioned. So what generally comes under this guidelines and tools box or this section?
Okay. So Deepak, from the exam point of view, you can expect 3 to 4 questions from the guidelines and tools. And from the BEBOK standpoint, let me explain you. Guidelines and tools, the reason is like it can be used as a reference. So they have not added all the inputs. They added only as maybe when I was explaining you the first task, analyze current state, you can see that like only business requirements was mentioned. Change strategy was given as a reference. So Babok is saying that like this can be used, whatever can be used as a reference material, they have mentioned as a guidelines and tools. And
Okay.
from the exam standpoint, it is, and I don't think that like it will be quite tough to memorize most of the guidelines and tools. You complete all the 6 knowledge areas, and then you go back and read all the guidelines and tools, and then you can take an educated guess, because most of the guidelines and tools, you can take an educated guess, because you know, if you understand the context, and if you can try eliminating all the wrong options, and then you can choose. So guidelines and tools, not memorize, take an educated guess.
No, no, that's okay. I'm not asking about memorizing and the exam point. The idea is basically to understanding purpose. So
Yes.
guidelines, I understand the reference thing maybe, but what
Yeah,
is
it is.
tool? What do you mean by tool?
Yeah, so the tools is like if you go to RADD, you can see that like most of the RADD, we use a requirement management software. So that is a guideline, and that is a tool which we use. So whenever you have a particular task, for instance, traceability matrix, we have to do the traceability. The traceability matrix in coming in requirement lifecycle management. The first task is trace requirements. So whenever you're doing trace requirements, you're doing it in a particular tool, which is called as requirement management tool. So that's why in guidelines and tools, we'll mention about that tool also.
Okay.
Deepak, you have any more questions?
No, Satish. That's all for now.
Okay. How about others? Anyone?
Yeah, Shakti, so this is Vijay. I have one question. It's regarding the transition requirement. So into the change strategy as well, you mentioned that transition requirement, like some of we can take an example of migration project. So in the perspective of the BABOK, what I sense that are they also mentioning that when you move your project from maybe one environment, like maybe in the dev environment or maybe in the build environment, that you're moving to the UAT, that is also being called as a transition requirement when you want to connect it in that perspective?
No. That is not migration. So migration is like if you move from on-premise to cloud, that will classify as a migration. But not environment related transition will not come under, unless if you're moving into a completely, the basic premise of transition requirement is like completely moving into a new environment. And that new environment, you have to configure a lot of parameters, you have to make a lot of changes. So in that case, in order to do those changes, those all things are called as transition requirements, because their life is quite temporary only, because once it is going to the new environment, those requirements will become obsolete, or those requirements can be retired. So to answer your question, if that is completely a new environment and you have to change a lot of things, but that change, whatever you're doing, those changes are only short-lived, because once you implement it in the new environment, these requirements can be retired. So in that context, I don't know about, like you said, some one environment to the other environment, but I'm telling you the basic premise. So all the short-lived requirements, if you're moving my data from one environment to the other, those are all called as transition requirements.
Yeah, but Babok also says that solution evaluation, that chapter is, that is the place where most of the transition requirements are analyzed, right? So
okay.
Solution.
Particular task.
Yeah, so particular task, the first task, like measuring the solution performance, then analyzing solution performance, then limitation of the solution. So Babok says that we are basically analyzing the transitioning requirement. How we can connect that dots actually? I'm just little bit confused, like how it is related with the transitioning requirement, the solution evaluation.
Okay, the solution evaluation, what do you look at? Like once the implemented solution is in place, you look into the potential value and business objectives, and then you come up with those measures. So that is the first task. The second task is you analyze those performance measures, and then the third task is you try to find out what is going wrong in the application. So in solution limitation, the first thing you find out is the dependencies between those applications. Like, is there any internal dependencies? Transition requirements are mentioned here but those will not play a very important role. Transition requirements is something which we'll refer in order to check during the transition, did something go wrong?
I see. Okay.
It's not that important.
Okay.
Importance is given more for the implemented solution versus business objectives and potential value. So those three will give you the performance measures. Transition requirements is something overlooked during as part of assess solution limitation task. You look at all the technical things because you may think that we are not able to meet our goals. Is it because of some technical limitations? I'm going and finding it out. And when I'm doing that root cause analysis, like what can go wrong in my implemented solution from the technical wise, it can be we may check those transition requirements to see if something is not implemented correctly or incorrect. So that analysis is transition. That's when we look at transition requirements.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Satish.
Hello. Hi, Satish. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
this
you.
side Videsh here. Thank you so much for the webinar. It was really helpful. So I have one question. Since we discussed about risk assessment, okay.
Yeah.
So as a business analyst, how does it play and does it play a significant role? Because as a business analyst, the main focus is into requirement elicitation, requirement definition, and then discussing with the developer, the teams, and basically the communicating the UAT part. So since we mentioned about the risk assessment, is it how crucial it is? Like a business analyst should know all the strategies or the points to be in place to understand the risk and mitigate that risk.
Yeah, Videsh. So I put a disclaimer during the start of my session saying that strategy analysis is done by the strategy consultants, very less opportunity for the BA to do it. But the intention why IIBA introduced this chapter in BAPOC version 3, we didn't have this chapter in BAPOC version 2, or maybe we just had only 25% of it. But the intent is that BAPOC wants the business analyst to understand more about the business perspective, because IIBA understands that we are all IT business analysts. We concentrate only from the IT standpoint. We don't concentrate more on trying to understand what is going on with the organization. So for that intent, they give us the introduction. So how can you contribute yourself for those risk-related things is try to check out in your organization, do they hire any strategic consultants for all those projects, business case, business need? Do we have anything? Who works on the strategy team in your organization? Second thing which you can do is try to talk to your stakeholders and try to express your interest working in the strategy projects. So then once you go to the strategy projects, you will get a complete bird eye view of the complete organization. You will have access to a lot of information. And once you have access to a lot of information, you will be in a position to recommend those risks. As of now, whenever you see those risks, you will be wondering, how can I recommend risk, because all I know is what we work on that particular project is what we know. But once you have access to all the information, once you move up the ladder, there are high chances wherein what can be a potential risk, and you will be in a position to identify it. So for that, you will have to go into the strategy team, discuss with them, understand the overall high level intent, business need, business case, and change strategy, current state description, future state description, everything. Once you understand it in and out, then you will be in a position to tell this can be a risk. IT infrastructure can be a risk because I know we have only 4 servers. So in that way, you'll be able to recommend it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And one more question, since in a few of the GDs I have gone through, and I've seen that they expect the BAs should know the budgeting part, like budgets about the project budget. So I just wanted to know about this because in a recent discussion with my team, since I'm working as a business analyst, I was dropped from a call when they were discussing about budgets and everything. So I just want to know, as a BA, how budgeting should plays a role. What kind of this as a business analyst, you should be aware about the budgeting part as well.
Okay, Videsh, you're not alone. So even very less opportunity. There are not many BAs who get opportunity to be part of it, because budgeting is completely taken care by the project manager. And if we have to dabble into the budgeting, because most of those budgetings we are kept in the dark. and we may provide our inputs, but they don't involve us that great, because those all things are done by the project manager. It is the primary responsibility for the project manager. So his only job is to do the budgeting and allocation of the work, release WBS and lot of stuff. So as a business analyst, if you have to learn about budgeting, try to do PMP certification, try to dabble yourself into the project management market. You have to market yourself as a project manager, because coming from the business analyst background, becoming a project manager is very much easy, because if you look at both WebOC and PMBOK, at least 60 to 70% of the content is the same. But the way wherein PMBOK is different is on the estimation, budgeting plus risk analysis. Those three things are different. That is something which we will have to learn from. Learn something extra in that book. So to answer your question, budgeting is important. We are also, we need to know the complete information, right? We need to know the return on investment. We need to know like what is the opportunity cost, sunk cost, what is the WBS, how much has been spent. We are quite curious because we have been associated with that project. But how can we learn all that? Let's dabble into the project management and then express your interest to the senior stakeholders, saying that like, I would like to contribute my, since you're a business analyst, and if you have a very good rapport with your senior stakeholders, I would recommend you to talk to them and tell them your inherent desire that like, I'm quite curious to understand the budgeting, and maybe I can pitch in and I can contribute my part also with related to the estimation and prioritization. So you can bank on that rapport which you have, and then you can slowly, that's how, like earlier even I was not involved in it, but slowly I got into the good books, and now like I dabble in it. But I realized that like that is of no use to us, because okay, this is just my 2 cents, because I realized it is a primary responsibility of a project manager. So he's the one who's completely doing it. So he doesn't share most of the information, and most of the estimations and the budgeting is done in MS Project, those kind of softwares also. And now with the advent of agile, so if you say that budgeting was like before the waterfall projects, budgeting was like a very big thing, you know what, when you work in a waterfall, because that estimation and everything. But now with the advent of agile, budgeting is not a big key skill, because you know what is the team velocity, you know what is the sprint velocity, and you know that how many user stories can be done in a particular sprint and everything. So the role, ideally Scrum Master to an extent he does it, but you as a business analyst you can also do it. But ideally if you work in a waterfall kind of strict kind of environment, you can pitch in, talk to your stakeholders, and you can try to dabble in it. It's not rocket science, Videsh. It's quite easy only to understand. Maybe a week or so, once you understand, because every organization have their own way of estimation. Few organizations use Delphi, few organizations use rolling wave of estimation. So you have to understand like what is the style that is used by your current organization and the project. And once you learn it, it's quite easy to master.
Thank you so much, Satish, for your time.
Hi, Satish. Do you still have some? Yeah, I was telling that I was just inquiring when will be the next session, because it is good if we have a track on when the session is going to be. And also, can you please take any scenario-based questions on this knowledge area strategy analysis next time?
Yes, we do have this every month. We have a webinar, so you guys can check out the mailbox regarding all those tech canvas, right? So we had 2 weeks before, we had an open session on CBAP scenario-based questions, wherein I was showing all the scenario-based questions and I was asking folks to answer them. So that was completed 2 weeks.
I attended that, but it was due to very limited time. Like it was not sufficient for us to gain much from it.
Okay, you guys can write down to the support team, and those folks, maybe they can plan. Maybe you can write it down as a feedback.
When I am taking those practice tests, I get a lot of doubt at that time, but I don't know when the next session is going to be. So then I lose my doubts.
Okay. You can reach out to the support team, so those folks can answer. And if you have any questions or something, and if you have already enrolled for that question bank, you have this email support, so you can put all your list of queries, and somebody will be responding to each of your queries. They will respond to the details.
To that?
Sorry?
Somebody does reply to those queries if I post in my queries there?
Yes. You can write down to Tech Canvas team. Those folks will reply.
Okay.
So Navendu, you have a question. Can you please share your success story and how you managed to digest each case, specifically strategy analysis to begin with? So folks, I'll tell you my honest story. It all started with 3 months of preparation, and first 2 months, simply I was reading webhook and I completely forgot. Okay. So mine was like organization sponsored. So only at the last minute, 1 week before the examination, I got those jitters, and I was like completely blank because the strategy, the methods which I used was like completely simply, I was like doing a blind reading. I was not even I was simply wasting my time. So ideally, my total preparation time was only 3 days. So 3 days I took off. I took PTO, and 3 days I started reading it as a story. So my only recommend, I don't know whether this will work because it is not. There is no holy grail method because everybody based on their intellectual capacity, it all differs from person to person. So I'm just telling my perspective. The way how I read Babok is like I started reading it as a story. So every time when I read each of the section, I was reading it as a story. I was imagining that I was doing that in my current project. So in that way, within a single reading, I was able to memorize most of the concepts because everything was like vividly. I can see, okay, this in this context, I will be doing this. So even for scenario-based questions, I trained my mind in such a way that like whatever I read, I was visualization. Sorry, I was imagining all of the things, right? So that helped me in understanding, helping me to choose the right option for all the scenario-based questions. So my only recommendation for you guys is like don't simply read because I wasted 2 months of my time by simply reading it. So reading is not going to take you anywhere because this book is quite dry and very boring. And the same word, project, stakeholder, sponsor is getting repeated more than 30, 40 times, and your mind will not pick up anything interesting in it. So my suggestion is to make it more of like a story-based thing and try to concentrate on those story and imagine yourself doing this. And you can harness the power of visualization, and visualization alone will help you to like remember more. With a single reading you can remember most of it. So that is my strategy, guys. So I'll not tell you that like I did this, that, and everything. I just did only 3 days of preparation, and those 3 days of preparation maybe 8 to my total preparation is like around 30 to 40 hours. That's it. Start visualization of the whatever you're reading. Babok will be most interesting book, and try to imagine that you're doing this in your current project. In that case, you can answer any scenario-based question. Okay, then, okay, time's up, guys. So I had a nice time talking with you all. So all the best for your preparation, best wishes, and thank you, folks. Thank you for joining. Okay, then, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Satish. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks, that canvas.
This